It's the chamber. See, the chambers is muted.
Oh, that's fine, but you're not muted now.
Okay.
there we go.
Interest. Just perhaps noting that I have a conflict in one of the papers later today, I think. That's today. Anybody else? Okay. But we have public forums. We have two today. We've got Scott Hobson, who's zooming in behind me somewhere, and we've also got Olivia and Mark now attending from the Balance Farm Awards group. So we'll come to them shortly, but we've got Scott online somewhere. Welcome, Scott. This is a bit weird because the camera's over there, but you're back here somewhere. So
Let's see.
still connecting to audio. Somebody will tell me.
Oh, I see you see now.
Look over your shoulder, Rachel. Thanks. So Scott's here to talk to us about reductions in nitrate outputs from pastoral farming, I believe. But I'll leave it to you, Scott, to introduce yourself. You've got 5 minutes, and councillors can have 5 minutes-ish of questions. So thanks for your time, if you're there.
I don't think you can get us.
2
There he is.
testing.
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
That's probably
I guess it's a no.
He seems to be connecting in two places, but yes, you can two on the screen.
It's fairly typical of my week, this would be, actually.
Yeah,
Let's just go with the flow.
At the moment.
Can someone message him on the side here and tell him to just start speaking?
You can hear us, Peter, can't you?
Yep.
Scott, can you hear us? Give us a thumbs up if you can. Okay, you can now. We can just hear you, so if you want to make a start, that will be fine.
I had asked for a guidance on how to bring up a PowerPoint because that was going to be my original talk to you. I can see no way to do that at the moment.
We've just got Michaela on the job. She's doing what she can. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, unless we switch the public pages.
Yeah, I was just going to. Scott, do you mind?
Hang on.
Oh.
Hopefully that will do it.
It looks like it's coming.
Right. Do you have on screen now a PowerPoint?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right. Righto, let's get rid of that. Okay. Kia ora and thank you. Mauru uru ko mo tēnei. Thank you for your time. Chairman Nicol Horrell asked me if he remembers about at the last Waimumu Field Days to do a 5-minute presentation on reducing nitrate leaching. I finally got to around to doing that. So this talk is about reductions in nitrate outputs from pasture farming and a better way forwards, following on from his request. But we can't wind back the clock. We don't know what 60 years of or 100 years of farming is going to come through with time. All we can do is control what's going to go in the top. So what goes in the top will ultimately end up in the wells. And obviously dairying is one of our primary problems. So historically leaching, it's 3 cows a hectare based on reports from 2008 from Northern Southland. typically is 35 to 50 kilos of N per hectare. At 100 mils of drainage, like in northern Southland, that equals about 46 milligrams of nitrate nitrogen per litre, which is roughly 14 milligrams per cow. At 200 mils of drainage, it equals 23 milligrams of nitrate nitrogen per litre, which is roughly 7 milligrams per cow. Of that, fertiliser is roughly only 1 to 4 milligrams. So fertiliser has never been the primary problem. I estimate even at 23 milligrams to get down to what I think would be a safe drinking water target with a buffer zone to allow for spikes, we need greater than 75% reductions in nitrate leaching from stock, particularly from urine, and that can be done. The first of two requirements is to reduce cow urine output. Now, cows can't process any more than 16% to 18% protein in their diet, and yet most of our cow diets, according to Overseer, is 28% or more. So it's the excess that is the problem. So this is the work from Castillo done in 2001. This kind of work goes back to the 1950s. 28% protein, when you come down to 16% protein, which is you reduce the nitrogen in the urine by 75%. Soil can cope better with 75% less urine nitrogen. If clover and liquid nitrogen keep protein levels high, minimal leaching reductions will occur. This is the work from Wilkinson and Waldron done in Lincoln University in 2017. This was published. And you can see I've put in here in the middle, we're well over, most of the research has done, assessed the field leaching number, which is usually an assumption of about 260 grams of nitrogen output per day, which is basically this green line in May. But when you have what I've been measuring in some herbage tests in Southland, 4.2%, that's the red line I've put in the middle. You've got a massive difference. So you're expecting basically to see higher levels of nitrogen because it's not related to urea, it's related to the protein in the diet. That dotted line is about where we need to get to. The stock perform better with less excess protein. So that's not a negative for farmers. I should say Dr. Lucy Waldron tried to present this to the government in 2012. And I think it was at Manawatu, and she was simply told that there's no money in the budgets for educating farmers on this. So that could have solved 60 to 70% of the problem if we'd actually had some education money for educating farmers on protein levels. So the second requirement is to control nitrifying bacteria. Basically, urea, whether it's either in a bag or coming from urine, gets converted to ammonia, and then that can be held in store. Nitrifying bacteria go to nitrates, and if that is too fast, then you end up with higher levels of leaching. So DCDs in the past helped to control this. Our own products have been doing similar, according to our lysimeters. When that happens, grass growth actually goes up 20 to 30%. And here the green line is what we've done in farms at Oxford versus humates, and we actually had 40 units less nitrogen on our side there, so you can see considerable improvements, particularly in winter. This is what that kind of excess nitrate conversion looks like on the left versus smoothing it out on the right. You don't have those tall urine patches. So when we combine both the lower nitrogen levels in the diet, you get less urine concentration and to a degree, soil nitrification processes, we've been able to reduce leaching from 15 milligrams of nitrate nitrogen down to 1.2. Right, the barriers that we've found towards going forwards is a complacency towards educating the core issues. It hasn't been done, and it could have been done 20 years ago. Thank you. I don't know what time it is, but I'm assuming I'm in within my 5 minutes because I haven't heard a bell.
Yeah, just about spot on. Thank you, Scott. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
sorry, I'll just get myself organised here and then take questions.
You got the sped up version. I had 10 minutes at DCAN a couple of years ago.
I'm sure the councillors will ask questions that'll probably fill in the gaps.
Jeremy,
That's true.
his hand up, and I'll let Morris has got his
Yes.
hand up.
Thank you. So far, I've got councillor McPhail. And then who, sorry?
Morris.
Councillor Rodway, and then Nan Horrell.
Yep,
Thank
thanks, Scott. That's quite interesting. I'm a dairy farmer, so I've got one question. Just in regards to on the 100 mil, what do you mean by 100 millimetre and 200 millimetre drainage?
100 mils of drainage is the difference between what rainfall is and evaporation. So that's your leaching volume. You've mostly been taught only in kgs per hectare, but if you go back through this report, you'll see that the control at Oxford had 13.74 kilos of nitrogen leached, but there was only 90 mils of drainage, which still meant we still had 15 milligrams of nitrates per litre. Ultimately, that water without sufficient river recharge or surface recharge from rain, which doesn't really appear to be happening very much, river recharge can. Then you will end up in your wells slowly progressing towards that 15 milligrams of nitrate number.
No worries, thanks.
Thanks. Councillor Rodway, please.
Thank you, Scott. It's Morris Rodway here. So the nitrate leaching is reduced, but what happens to the nitrogen? Is it lost as nitrogen oxide, for example, in those conditions that you're talking about in the winter time?
No. So nitrous oxide is related to the concentration of nitrogen in the urine. And so we've been seeing in our work with our products that we've been down about 200 kgs of N per hectare. Once you drop below 350 kilos, there's about an 80% drop in nitrous oxide going from 350 kilos of N down to 200. So you've got 75 or 80% less nitrogen to be able to turn into nitrous oxide. So it works. It's not been disputed by our government research institutions. We haven't been able to get support because we're not a startup company, and it's not patentable. That's the thing. But there's also methane reductions in doing this as well. But that's not for this talk.
Thanks, Scott. Chairman Horrell?
Yes, thanks, Scott. That was fascinating, and I guess quite a few of us would like to know a little bit more about lowering the protein in the diet, because yes, I've always been aware that actually the urine patches are the biggest issue, and you're basically saying that if you can do that, you're not dropping your production and your animals are healthier. I think the industry and a lot of people in this room would actually like to know a bit more about that. But thanks for actually making the time to present.
Councillor Gibson?
Sorry.
Scott, is the education a function of changing species or introducing humates? I heard you mention that.
Humates does not necessarily change that nitrogen level. Then there's quite big variation. So we don't use humates, we use bacteria and fungi. The easiest way to do it is through pasture. Whether you do that through products like ours, so you can maintain short grazing, you have to be able to maintain a high ME level. You can't have the lower protein and lower ME levels or it doesn't work. So our products, we know, do that. Other companies have to stand up and find that their products will do that as well. So the only other way to reduce, to educate this, which is what Dr. Lucy Waldron was saying, was to use various kinds of supplements at certain times of the year to keep that protein level low. That's a relatively expensive way to do it, but it is a way to do it if people simply resist bacterial technology, if you like.
Can I have a supplementary there, Scott? You say our products. What are our products?
Our products are fermentation-based products, so with bacteria and fungi that we've worked at for about 25 years. So
sprayed on. Sprayed on.
Yes, sprayed on, yeah, at the moment, yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, councillor, Chairman Horrell, you had a question in there. Did you get an answer just then, or do you still?
Well, I think that's probably part of it, yes, is how do we actually do that? So I think it probably has been answered. Oh, Eric sort of had his hand up.
I'm
You
coming
did
to councillor Roy next, in fact. Councillor Roy.
Thank you. Yeah, look, Scott, very interesting and a lot of stuff to absorb in a short time. For the last 80 years, we kind of lived on clover to produce nitrogen and a ryegrass base. We've sort of broadened that a bit in recent years, but are you saying we need to address the matter of pasture species, and what would that look like?
We have seen in many cases the clover will be 4 to 5% nitrogen, so that keeps the protein levels high in the diet. And of course, it's what's people. This is the concern: is people are trying to get rid of urea, trying to grow more clover to replace the urea, and that is semi-delusional if that level stays at 4 to 5%. So we have seen clovers on our treated pastures, depends on how much stalk is there, like 30 or 40%, and we've still been down about 3.1% nitrogen instead of, say, 4.5% that Overseer would be showing. So we're working kind of with Overseer as much as anyone can to start reintroducing the policy they used to have of being able to allow users to change the protein or the nitrogen assumptions that are in Overseer based on herbage tests per farm and the ME levels. That should see a significant drop if they do it properly. We've forwarded some spreadsheets to them. Getting answers out of them seems to be incredibly difficult. In action, I was promised answers before Christmas and still can't get one. But it's happening. So it will allow farms to start individualizing, or certainly councils to start individualizing farms. I think it will probably have to be on a voluntary basis from each farm, because there's going to be a lot of resistance for those that don't want to change anything in their operations or make adjustments. But there is progress happening to reintroduce that policy that Overseer used to have.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Scott, very much for your time and for giving our brain cells a wee bit of some exercise first up this morning. I think the councillors look like they're all thinking about that quite deeply. So thanks very much, and maybe we'll have another opportunity to hear a more detailed explanation at some later date. But thank you very much for your patience with the technology and for appearing with us this morning.
Good luck
Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks.
Thank you. Right. On that note, welcome Olivia and Mark from Balance team. I'm sure you're going to enlighten us this morning.
Always. Oh, thank you very much again for your time this morning. My name is Olivia Weatherburn and I am the chair of the Southland Balance Farm Environment Awards Committee. And
I'm Mark Hunter, part of the committee, and I role in the judging side of it.
so we're just here today to make sure that you guys know about the Balanced Farm Environment Awards and what we're doing, and we see some synergies that link to the Environment Southland Awards and what you guys are doing as well. I want to try and make some connections there as well. So we've just got a few small things to make sure that you're aware of what's happening there. So it hasn't changed up there, but it's, oh, there we go. So what are the awards? They are there to look at really a big picture of what farmers are doing to embrace every stage of their sustainability journey, and it's providing an opportunity for them to showcase, benchmark, celebrate the environment, social and economical sustainability pieces of the operation. So we look at a big picture piece of what they're doing on farm, everything from their people to their water to how they are working with their livestock. So it's enabling them to get ideas and take those next steps. For some of them, gain confidence and to take those next steps, but also to celebrate the great things with them, their teams and themselves of what they've achieved over the years. As we know, across Southland, there is so many farms that are generational, and so they haven't probably had the chance to celebrate, and they've got the next generation coming in. So it's about celebrating them as well. So Mark's just going to also just go through what that process looks like from the awards side of things. And I'll let you do that now, Mark.
So a big part of our role in the committee is making sure we get these farmers doing awesome things in Southland to enter the awards. Very similar to what you guys do for your set. That's tricky at times. We're a very humble base of farmers in Southland, so getting them to put themselves out there is part of the trick. So the way we start is once we've got the entrants, we get somewhere between 7 and 12. We do a first round of judging where they get 3 people from our committee and a group of farmers that just sit in a subcommittee, come around and judge them on that people, the animals, the farm, their overall setup, make sure they're ticking all those boxes individually. And then we put names forward and we look to have 3 to 5 finalists that we judge in round 2. They get a separate set of 3 people coming around, all leading towards what we've got coming up on the 10th of April, which is our award ceremony where we celebrate. There's 12 awards.
Yes.
Of which Environment Southland's award is part of that. Then the really cool bit is when we do find our award winner, the Supreme Award winner, they go and represent Southland on a national showcase. The other part to that is that they get a field day. This is where we try and capture our next group of people entering the awards. So again, another real push to different networks through, we've got bankers and fertiliser and industry professionals as well as you can play a role in getting the right people along there so that we can identify the next set of entrants each year and get the right people representing Southland on the national stage.
Yeah, so part of that also is not ticking boxes as such, but having some really good deep conversations with them. Sorry, the Zoom thing just gave up on the computer. It was you.
I thought it was me.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So we really just we see a synergy between what you guys have with your Environment Southland Awards as well, and obviously you've got that farming section, and we see that being a really great stepping stone to the Balanced Farm Environment Awards, where they can then go and represent Southland at their higher level and then at that national showcase. So national showcase this year will be at Te Papa in Wellington. So they bring all the regionals together and then they go for the Gordon Stevenson Trophy. And then next year it's actually going to be in Christchurch. But we wonder whether there could be more of a synergy where you have those finalists that you have at your awards, encouraging them then to take the next step and enter the Balanced Farm Environment Awards. And then we also have entrants. So as we say, we can start with 7 or 8 entrants. We come down to 3 or 4 finalists. That those entrants would be great for your awards as well. So it's about building their confidence and still trying to celebrate the great things they're doing. For some of them, they're just at the start of their journey and they're not ready to be potentially that national showcase winner or representative of Southland. And some people just want to come in there, do their best and for that. But for example, the Millers last year, who were our winners, they had actually entered about 8 years before that. And so a lot of our winners in the last few years, the Grant brothers were the same. They had entered about the same period before. So they'd already been in the system, had a go. The difference with our awards too is we find that it's not, you don't have to have a presentation, you don't have to have a whole lot of, I suppose, stuff to present. It's sit around the kitchen table, have a good old Southland discussion, and then go out on farm and let's look at things, take us to the sediment trap, the duck pond, have a look at that, have a look at the livestock, just have a really good general farm tour at the same time. So really encourage you guys to, where you can, to send entrants our way, and we can do the same your way. And if you can, make it to our awards next Thursday night, and then we have our winners field day, and I can let you in that it'll either be the 13th or the 20th of May, a Tuesday. That is when the winners field day will be. We will announce that next Thursday night, so it just depends who wins. Those are the two dates that we've got penciled at the moment. So yeah, we'll just
So thanks for the ongoing support of the awards. It's great to have you on board, and this is sign of our appreciation towards it.
So yeah, we'd like to present this to the council this morning as well. So this is the Miller family, and a little bit about them, and just recognising that partnership between Environment Southland and the Balance Farm Environmental Trust and the New Zealand Farm Environment Trust in general. Before we leave, if maybe we can get a photo with Nicole giving that to you, that would be great.
That would be fine.
Okay.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much. We've got a couple of questions. So we've got Chairman Horrell first, and then Councillor Gibson.
Yes, look, thank you for presenting, and I've always been a strong supporter of your awards and the complementary way we can work together. And I've seen your awards develop over the years, and probably in the early days they were sort of economic with a little environment. That you've moved through that, and you're growing leaders in the community with the sort of the mentoring role they now do. But even people who don't get right through, I've heard a lot of people say that the judges have given them a few pointers of where to go, and so the accentuating the positive has always been great. And unfortunately, I'll be in Christchurch. Can't go to your awards, but one of the first times I've missed it in a long time. But good luck. I think it's accentuating the positive is always great. It's actually lifting people up, and people, farmers in particular, they learn from other farmers. So well done.
Yeah, I think Councillor McDonald was actually a finalist a number of years ago as well.
Never mind. Sorry, Councillor. Councillor Gibson, and then Councillor Romain.
We're getting some pressure to either take our awards to biannual or not have them at all because of the cost of it. Is there any possibility of getting heads together and maybe joining? We're slightly different, but then we're sort of the same, and that might reduce the total cost to each organisation. I'm not sure, but that's the pressure we're getting from outside.
It's definitely a conversation that we can link you guys up with. This is obviously run by the New Zealand Farm Trust at a national level, so it involves all those other 8 regions as well, so it affects them on what we do down here. They try and keep a consistency, but definitely a conversation, and does make sense. How can we make some more synergies? We'll put that back to them and go from there.
Thank you.
Councillor Rodway.
Not really a question, Madam Chair, but you probably don't know this, but I was a judge for Balance Farm Environment Awards back in about the 1990s when I was working for Fish and Game, when Fish and Game and farmers had a better relationship, and it was a very enjoyable experience, going to the farms and looking at what they were doing, and they're so, these are the leaders of our farming community, and they really are a good example that we should all learn about. So it's a wonderful project, and I fully support it, and I will be there next Thursday along with 3 others. I think Alice is coming, and Jeremy and Peter. So
we look forward to having you.
thank you.
Thanks, councillors. Thanks very much, you two. Apologies from me as well. I'm away also, so but I've had the privilege of attending and really enjoyed them. So, and I'm one of our judges, so I see the connection there. But yes.
Oh, what was in the camera? Look at that. Right, Mark, you can get as
Yeah, because I haven't had video.
Thank you very much.
That was
Thank you.
Yes, yeah. I'll just tell. Just a heads up, we've got some internet/network issues, so people's screens are coming and going and behaving slowly and all sorts of things. So, Councillor McDonald, if you have any issues, maybe your best bet is to write your questions or comments in the chat so that we don't lose it, just in case. Otherwise, we'll box on and just hope that everything works out nicely. Okay, nice to have a couple of deputations. It's always my favourite part, but we need to move on to the confirmation of minutes, which is item 5. Minutes of the meeting from the 24th of February.
Anyone move, Madam Chair?
Thank you, Chairman. Seconded, please. Councillor Gibson. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against. Carried. Thank you. I've got no notification of extraordinary or urgent business and no questions that have been circulated prior. Chairman and councillors' reports is item 8. Any councillors? Thank you, Councillor Rodway.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a verbal report. I did send it to you and Councillor Morrison and Peter McDonald as well. Just a report on the Councillors' Day at the planning conference last week, where the 4 of us attended, so you might like to say something as well. 3 main items were presented to us. The first one was about misinformation and disinformation and how to manage it. And my conclusion was that it's very difficult to manage it, and I'm not saying it's almost impossible, but it's a real challenge in this day and age with social media and everything. The second item was a presentation by Ministry for the Environment senior staff, and that was about the changes in the Resource Management Act, and you've had a lot of information about that, so there's nothing much more I can personally add to that. And the last presentation was from a staff member from Wellington on the technology side of things and how technology can help us understand what we've got by getting images of all kinds under the ground and from space and everything. And it's really amazing how new technology can help us with planning and looking at how things might change in the future, and using artificial intelligence to predict what might happen and look at real life scenarios of what things might be in the future. And there's a wonderful opportunity there. And I'm sure that this council and the staff are aware of all of that. Opportunities, we already use LiDAR, and that can be combined with artificial intelligence and images from space to look at the way things might be in the future. So those were the 3 main items that I attended, and I thought it was very useful.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Morrison or
And Councillor McDonald has a quick
Councillor
question.
McDonald, yes, I say that. I'll come. Councillor McDonald, your question was to Councillor Rodway about. Sorry, I can't say it.
You had some great quotes to describe the misinformation session. Would
Yes,
you like to share those with us?
share them with us. Or just even a general comment, Morris, around that session. It was quite interesting.
I don't want to share those. They were a rare impulse, which I regret.
The difference between mis and disinformation was interesting, and I'm not going to attempt to translate that just at the minute because my brain's not working. But Councillor Morrison's probably able to do that. Have you got any comment?
Oh no, just that broadly speaking, I think the whole workshop was valuable, and there was low levels of attendance from elected members from across the country. Good, reasonable representation from Southland, but I would commend the attendance at such future events where possible.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Really fascinating, especially the some of that technology. Really exciting. Chairman Horrell, do you have a report or a question?
Yes, it was on Friday we had sort of a working lunch, about an hour and a half, with Minister Bishop and Minister Simmons, which was good to have the session. There was a lot of stuff we're still working through. They appear to be further advanced than we probably thought they were on the framework. Good to hear Chris Bishop saying he wants to get cross-party support, which I think is essential. And I think this, when you look at it, a lot of it is not that dissimilar with the 2 bills to what the previous government had. Where the balance between property rights and the environmental bill sit will be probably the most contentious issues. But simplifying the steps everybody has to go through. It makes a lot of sense. But we'll be watching the space. Sort of an indication that it's in the paper later about reducing the number of national instruments, and we sort of had the impression that the cabinet were looking at the farm plan thing on Monday. Whether we're going to see something this week, I don't know, but we'll watch that with interest.
Thanks, Chairman. And some of that probably will come up again later in the papers. Councillor McDonald?
Yeah, I just want to add to that session that we're at.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
The timetable, we were very fortunate to have some senior Ministry for the Environment staff members there, but they indicated a timetable that's going to push these reforms through, that's going to push right up against the election. They're very positive that they can do it, but it's still quite ambitious. And one interesting thing is that they did say is that they don't expect to get everything right, but they'll get it near enough, and they're relying on the select committee process to refine and get all those crinkles out of the legislation. So, yeah, it's coming pretty late, but it looks as though it's a central piece to the coalition agreement, so it has to happen. So, yeah, watch this space, I would say.
Thanks, Councillor. And on the select committee point you made, isn't it great that we've been included in many select committee discussions so far on other things? So one would hope we would continue to do so. Councillor Gibbs, did you have a question?
Peter,
report?
sorry, through you, Madam Chair. Peter, was that the main country's election or our election you're talking about?
The general elections in 2026. They just gave us a timetable of when the processes will be happening. So it just seemed to me, and it was just a personal thought, that they've got to hit those marks and hit those timings really well to make this happen. But they seem very determined and quite confident that that will happen.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Any other reports from councillors? In which case we will move on to item 9.1, which is the Darwin's Barberry Biocontrol submission. Welcome, Holly.
Sure, everyone. I think everybody's had the reports. We'll take that as read, and if there's any questions.
Questions, Councillor Gibson?
Oh, no, sorry. Sorry.
Just have it. You've got a twitch.
I was sort of thinking we just pass it and move on.
Me too.
Councillor Roy?
Yeah, look, I'm aware that this thing's pretty widespread, and there doesn't seem to be any consciousness that it is actually a potential invasive kind of a weed. And I'm just not sure how we get that message across to the wider public. We happily are allowing it to, at initial stages of infestation, to just stay there. So, yeah, whereas half an hour with a grubber could save quite considerable expense at a later time. So what's happening to make this the public more aware?
Through you, Chair. We have some comms about it, but it is a hard topic to get people's interest in. It's not as easy to communicate with, but we can certainly review our comms plan and make sure we've got more actions in that space.
Thank you.
Councillor Guyton.
Thank you. Yeah, on that point, because I know that if you're releasing a bio agent into a stand of anything that you want to destroy, it can be counterproductive to be using other methods as well and grubbing holes in it. Or have you factored that into your process? So, for example, someone might then decide to spray it, but it's got the agent actively because it needs to build its numbers before it's effective.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, we definitely built that into the process. We've had cases where we've had accidental spraying on some of our other control biocontrol mechanisms, and sometimes it's difficult
when we have really key community groups. So the key thing for us is about ensuring we choose the right locations and the landowners who have those locations fully understand how to look after it, because I mean there is a level of care to get these biocontrols established and the population going, and that's the key thing, is we need to not only get them here, but we need to get them established, and so that we can harvest from them, so that we can then move them to different locations. So the team work really closely with the landowners that we choose to put those sites to, and they check in on them regularly on an annual basis.
Could I have a supplementary question, just with regard that climatically, are they more difficult to establish in coastal areas rather than in inland areas, or even frosty areas? So you've looked at all that as well, because sometimes there are factors like that which can make a good idea not go so well.
Through you, Chair. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm sure the team have that advice from the advisory groups that help us determine where to put them, and that they would be taking that into consideration. So we currently have one biocontrol for Darwin's barberry established here, and I understand it's the only population that got established in the country. So, you know, we are good at getting them going, I think. So I'm sure the team will take all those factors into account.
Just to add to Connie's answer there, Chair, I would also just note that the paper is regarding our support for the EPA, the application from Environment Canterbury. So it's to give us more tools in our kitty of tools, including how we communicate, but also making sure that we've got that site-specific approach. So it's in order for the EPA to consider that submission and for them to see that we're supportive of it, because it will be helpful for us as well. So
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. The introduction of biocontrols just makes my sci-fi brain go crazy. So it makes me really nervous that we even have to do that, but I completely understand. But the changing climate, how is that factored into Environment Canterbury's?
I'm not sure how they're accounting for that in this process.
Sorry, Stuart?
I was just to check. So I'm noting here that you had talked to Sharon Owen, but you'd also spoken to ESNO committee at Te Reo Manatau, is that right? And they were, I assume they were supportive of the introduction of these bugs and sprays and such like. Thank you.
If there are no further questions, would somebody like to move those recommendations, please? Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Seconded, Councillor Rodway. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thanks, team. Item 9.2 is the retrospective approval of past submissions. The retrospective part of this means that this is
done.
A highlight reel.
I'll move the recommendation.
But we might hear from the team first, just to be clear. Thank you.
Kia ora, councillors. So in this item, we are seeking retrospective approval for the 3 submissions that were launched previously in February. As approvals were sought outside our meetings, and they include some Environment Southland submission on local government water services bill, and the submission on modernising conservation land management, and lastly the one on exploring charging for access to some public conservation land. So the first submission relates to the bill number 3 of the local water well initiative. So the previous bill number 2 has introduced a preliminary arrangement for the system, and this bill number 3 puts flesh on the bones that were put in place by the previous bill. It introduces a new water services delivery system, a new economic regulation and consumer protection regime, and it more importantly for regional councils, it brings changes to the water quality regulatory framework. So in our submission to the committee, we expressed strong support for the strategic approach that was being proposed in the bill, and also for advocated for providing for greater iwi involvement. And we also requested some refinement of settings relating to national standards for stormwater and wastewater management is the proposal in the bill was such that the flexibility for regional tailoring is reduced because they try to fix this, put a cap on what we can impose in our resource consent as conditions. So that was one area we expressed some concern and provide suggestions for improvement. So next steps for this bill, select committee will report to Parliament in June, and the staff will be bringing you updates on the outcomes. And just for your information, this bill is closely linked to the current consultation on national wastewater standards. And at the moment, staff are developing a submission in collaboration with subject matter experts. The second submission on modernizing conservation management system. The purpose of the bill, purpose of the consultation is to simplify and streamline the system. So the proposals were wide-ranging, including improving the concession system, improving performance outcomes from concessions, and engaging with iwi on approvals for classes of activities rather than individual applications. There was one area staff expressed some concern, which was introducing flexibility around exchanging and disposing conservation land. So we included some points in our submission around that. And lastly, regarding charging for access, in our submission, we expressed support for the proposal to extend the basis for charging access fees and expressed preference that the revenue collected be reinvested in the region from which it was generated. With that, we'd like to invite comments or questions from you.
Talk to questions. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Rodway.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I recognise a huge amount of work has gone into this, and you guys must be spending a lot of overtime or something. It's just really amazing. There's so much stuff coming at us, and your submissions are so detailed and so good. I really want to commend you. In particular, a submission on clause 275 of the amendment of the section 107 of the RMA about how this could lead to a degradation of our water quality, and we've got so many goals and objectives and policies in our water plan and generally try to improve them. And this could easily make things go backwards. So, you know, that's just one thing, many other things too. So I really want to compliment you on it, and hope that these submissions are successful.
Councillor Gotton.
Why, sorry, nicely meant, why should we be asking only questions but not making comments?
Because that's the standard orders that we should be following. Usually we allow comment anyway, so. But I'd personally quite like to get the questions out of the way so that the staff can answer them and then have comments. So.
I'd be interested to see that standard.
Yeah, well,
I know that it exists.
it could be, you know, a different space for that, but I'll certainly double check it. And if you have a comment, please make it now.
Very kind. I don't.
If you don't have any questions, anybody else got questions?
Well, just more a comment that these bills keep coming at us thick and fast, and that this is retrospective. I think the staff have done a very good job at actually responding to stuff that was probably biting into their Christmas break. So and the fact that it's retrospective, we sort of can't change it now. So well done. I think, you know, the questions about charges in the national park, I think, you know, that's probably sensible, particularly when you've gone with these. So overseas visitors should pay more. The user pays to actually maintain things. As most people would probably agree with that. So well done. The water standards one, we certainly have got some concerns there that it appears that the level of service for urban discharge is going to be lowered, which obviously has a cost benefit. But I guess where we're sitting, what does that mean for the whole of catchment? Does it mean everybody else has to pick up the slack? These are questions that haven't been answered, and I think you guys picked those things up reasonably well during that. Some of that might have been an earlier submission, actually part of that. But no, well done.
Through you, Chair, I was just going to ask councillors and Mana Whenua representatives a comment. So we circulate obviously briefing notes for councillor and Mana Whenua input. Is that process working for you? We know we're obviously working in quite tight timeframes, which doesn't necessarily allow for workshops in the way that we would traditionally do this. But if you've got any thoughts or reflections on that process, it would be good to know.
Councillor Rodway.
Well, I think it's very good. I really appreciate being able to make comments on these things. It's excellent. Thank you. Keep it up.
In response to that, my preference is to have the conversations in person, but that's not always possible. So I appreciate the councillors who contribute to the online feedback as requested by staff, because I think it's a modern way of doing things. Stuart?
I would say my preference is face-to-face also, but time and tide, you know, as long as there's opportunities there, I guess is the main factor, isn't it, that we can have that opportunity to comment and respond to questions and answers and such like. So,
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Just while I'm speaking, can I just say I would like to say thank you to the staff and ES in their submissions and their recognition of the treaty rights and recognitions within those, and their call back to central government to not throw them out. We talk about them as being another one of those tools that are in our kitty, our treaty rights and opportunities within those treaty rights, and if we're just going to toss them, it's almost as if they're emptying out that kitty and all those particular tools have been tossed out. So I'll just say thank you without going into it too much. I really do appreciate the support coming in the recognition coming from this quarter. So kia ora.
Excellent, that's great to hear. Thank you.
Happy to move the
Thank
recommendation.
you, Chairman. Reminding you that there are 4 there, so these are receiving the report and the formal approval of the Local Government Water Services Bill, the modernising conservation land management, the exploring charging for access to some public conservation land. So we have a mover, do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Roy. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thanks, team. Carry on with the next big chunk. 9.3 is the update on government policy, which is probably Rachel, can take us to it.
I'll lead out to start with. Marcus is just bringing up a presentation, and we've got actually Philip Moore, our council solicitor, present as well, who is going to help the discussion this morning. So, as you'll be aware, a number of government announcements over the last few days, and so we wanted to take the opportunity, whilst noting many of you have received some form of update already, but just an opportunity to go through the key points of the announcements last Monday and Friday and what's coming, and just to, at a very high level, talk about what some of the implications of those announcements might be. So Marcus is going to kick off with a bit of discussion about the Expert Advisory Group blueprint and how that's fed into the Cabinet paper that was released last week. And we'll, then go from there.
Sure thing. Through you, Madam Chair. Effectively, the diagram on the screen is probably nothing new. You've seen that before. Effectively, phase 1 was when the current coalition government came in. There was a whole lot of stopping, and then they got into the starting piece, which is the phase 2, was really the earnest, which we've been working through with RM Bill 1, Bill 2, fast track consenting, a few other bits and pieces that have been coming thick and fast. Effectively, phase 3 has always been talked about as the replacement of the Resource Management Act and improving the national direction. So phase 3 report was the one that came out last week, and looking to get things done and move things forward in a number of sense.
Can Can I just ask a question? I don't know if it's appropriate time. Just talk about the replacement for the Resource Management Act. And the question I'm asking is, so they're talking about replacing, but in some of the changes they're proposing, they're still making reference back to accept certain sections within the Resource Management Act 1991. So they're still referencing things can happen or can't happen. They just keep referencing back to 1991, the Act. So when the change takes place, does that Act exist anymore? And so those references to that RMA 1991, is that still relevant at that time? Sorry, I don't know if I...
Welcome, Philip.
I don't know if was that fair or...
It's a good question. Good morning, councillors. Kia ora, Stuart. It depends how they write the new legislation. So there's going to need to be a transition from the current regime, which is the RMA 1991, into the two replacement pieces of legislation. When they write new legislation, that will have what they call transitional provisions that describe what happens for a period of time in terms of things that are already happening under the old legislation before the processes and systems that are to be embedded under the new legislation are actually set up and running. My expectation is that the RMA itself will fall away, but over a period of time, and that all of the provisions that are necessary to operate under the new system will need to be in the two new pieces of legislation. But until we actually see it in terms of the drafting, which is not straightforward.
My question was, for the purposes of because there's references to several of the changes, like talking about the changes happening except for certain matters within the RMA 1991, and I think, yeah, well, how long is that going to be for? So, anyway, thank you.
I've got Councillor Guyton, Councillor Cook and Chairman Horrell.
And I'm just wondering if you are not finished yet and you want to continue with your description, because I'm happy to wait.
Yeah,
sorry, I
thanks.
interrupted.
Yeah.
So effectively, the Cabinet had 10 principles that they were working to with the new Phase 3 legislation. It's a reasonably detailed slide. I don't want to read out the whole every 10 principles, but effectively they had a fairly good idea what they wanted to achieve through the new legislative process. So looking through reasonably quick, they want to narrow the scope, so effectively less effects. Instead of having a whole lot of litigious process of coming and going, looking at a whole lot of different effects, they want to try and narrow the scope to speed things up. We have 2 acts, one to manage environmental effects arising from activities such as urban activities, and then another one more focused on environmental aspects. Strengthen and clarify the role of environmental limits, provide greater use of national standards to standardise development and proposals and zones across the country, shift the system to a ex-ante consenting, from ex-ante consenting and strengthening compliance and monitoring. So putting more focus on the compliance and monitoring focus. Use spatial planning and have one regulatory plan per region. And also speeding up disputes resolution and upholding Treaty of Waitangi settlements and the Crown obligations. So it talks a lot there about settlements as opposed to there's a number of iwi in the country that haven't settled yet. So there's a process to work through that, but also provide for faster and cheaper litigious processes through that process. Next slide is from the blueprint that came out on Monday last week, effectively outlining the 2 new acts at the top of the screen there. Effectively, the one on the left seems to be more focused on territorial authority matters around planning and zones and how urban environments work. And the one on the right-hand side there seems to be more focused on regional council matters in its current form. Effectively, both pieces of legislation will be seeking to have national standards or standardised planning and effectively looking to shift from a precautionary approach to a more permissive regime and narrow the scope, more standardisation, and the national standards will pretty much prescribe exactly what can occur and can't occur. And then the spatial plan is effectively going to be a joint piece of work where those two pieces of legislation come together into a joint regional spatial plan in collaboration with stakeholders and all the associated parties, and there'll be a process around exactly how that works, but hasn't been determined just yet. The piece below that last slide, effectively that looks at combining regional plans and territorial authority plans into one regional planning document. And effectively it'll be more succinct, and territorial authorities will be required to write the chapters relating to their areas. Regional council will do their piece as well, and there'll be standardised zones. Environmental limits will be in that new plan. Some will be set nationally from central government relating to human health, but there will be limits be able to be set at a regional council scale. Exactly what that scope looks like is yet to be determined. But effectively the plan making process will be a more streamlined, more efficient process with more targeted engagement and limited appeal rights. So instead of having 8-9 years for a water and land plan to go through the process, it will be a lot more succinct and a bit more tight in that process. So effectively, key messages from the blueprint, shifting away from a precautionary approach and environmental limits. The monitoring bullet point there in the third step is reasonably important. So environmental compliance monitoring enforcement is sought to be undertaken by a national agency as opposed to through regional agencies, but they've indicated that the national agency will still have a regional presence, seeking to strengthen those compliance monitoring enforcement provisions. But also they're looking to try and have more standardised environmental monitoring to understand what is actually occurring in our natural environment. And that some of those messages have come through the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment too in a number of reports. So it's great to see that picked up in the blueprint to focus in on as well.
Can I ask a question? So if we're going to be, it seems like it's going to be more permitted activities happening around us. How do we go about knowing and being able to monitor permitted activities? How will Environment Southland know that people are actually active in those permitted activities? And so how will that monitoring happen? I guess.
Sure. So with the permitted, or the perhaps greater emphasis on permitted activities, that comes together with a power to levy users of resources to fund the monitoring of permitted activities. At the moment, there's a gap in terms of the effects of permitted activities, and councils have often said, well, we'd love to be able to go out and do more monitoring, but the system doesn't allow us to properly be funded to do that. So in the blueprint report, it expressly acknowledges that there's a greater need to monitor permitted activities, and that there are new funding mechanisms that will come in to facilitate and enable that.
So there'll still be a requirement to notify that you're undertaking a permitted activity.
That's probably a matter of detail that's just not available in terms of what's been published.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want to carry on?
Yeah,
Because we've got a list of questions. Yep, thanks.
In the Treaty of Waitangi space, they've indicated that they're not looking to put any principles in the new legislation. They still seem to be sort of deciding what that treaty principles piece is going to look like, and I think that links into those other pieces of legislation that we've already or those other bills that we've already seen the last 3 to 4 months. So we haven't really got any real clear direction on exactly how those aspects are going to be incorporated in that new piece of legislation.
You think they'd do that first? Wouldn't you? I would.
Thank you, councillor. You're right.
Next slide, it's just around a bit of a time frame. So effectively, I picked up on the comment before by Councillor Gibson. Effectively, the time frame for this is to be in by central government elections by mid next year. But just conscious too that the bill is going to be introduced to the House at some stage this year, which may impact on parliamentary or effectively when local government goes to elections as well. So we'll be trying to work through detail and understand submissions and progressing that through. So we might need to have some workshops in advance and try and get a bit of a clear steer from council as to a position and how that could work through that space if we get caught in that period before the elections land at a local government space. Effectively, the last part of presentation day is, as announced by the Minister last week, there's been a bit of a rescope around the national direction, phase 2. So that was part of phase 2. They were reviewing all the national direction packages, so the national policy statements for fresh water, national environmental standards, all of those sorts of aspects. So the Minister's indicated that with the way the amount of work going on and the priorities to get phase 3 through, they've looked to pause a few pieces and speed up other pieces just to try and get a better connection between the phase 2 and the phase 3 work. So the clarity we've received from the Minister last week was around the freshwater package is still continuing, and we were expecting some announcements in March, but they haven't come out yet around that freshwater aspects. But effectively, it's still on to continue progressing forward. That first bullet point here on the slides. The general national environmental standards are still progressing, such as granny flats, electricity transmission, telecommunications, marine aquaculture, commercial forestry, and papakāinga housing. All of those standards are still progressing and looking to be coming out towards the second half of this year. And additional policy statements around infrastructure, renewable energy, electricity generation, coastal policy statement review, natural hazards, and highly productive land, and the removal of land use capacity free soils from that is still progressing forward. And then there's some work done on the quarrying and mining activities with freshwater, indigenous biodiversity, and highly productive land all progressing forward. Some of the urban pieces are going to slow down, and we'll see that how that frames up moving forward.
Marcus, just before you move on from that previous slide, I'm not sure if there were councillors at the NZPI session on Friday where the Deputy Secretary James Palmer was present, and he did talk about that first bullet point and said that the decisions on national direction in that freshwater space were imminent. And we understand from senior officials that there will be communications very shortly. He also talked about a consultation or targeted consultation period happening late April, early May, and that update to the New Zealand Planning Institute members present at the conference. So just, wanting to highlight that point.
And I guess indications for implementation around the new Act. So previously, the Labor government's acts were about a 10-year transition into the new system. It seems the new system will be a lot quicker. They're expecting 2027 for that transition period. So it'll be relatively quick from RMA focus to the new systems and getting underway with the spatial planning and regional planning processes and those sorts of things, so a lot quicker in that respect. But the next slide is Rachel's slide around implications on what we've heard, the blueprint and cabinet decisions on Environment Southland. Who wants to go first?
This one's a bit of a tag team, and actually Hayley and others from the executive may want to contribute. So we had some discussions we've had discussions for a while actually about different scenarios and what that might mean for us and how we can achieve council priorities through various different ways. And we know that enabling good management practice is a key focus for this council. For example, wetland creation, that's been discussed many times. So some of the pathways relate to our regional plans, but others in terms of implementation of those plans or other pathways. So just wanting to go through those with you in a little bit of detail today so you can see potentially how we can keep advancing and achieving your outcomes whilst there is legislative uncertainty and national direction change. So actually, Hayley, did you want to talk a wee bit about the discussions around enabling good management practice and some of the thoughts in a consenting space?
Kia ora koutou, through you, Chair. Certainly we want to get going and making sure that people who want to do good things to align with our outcomes are able to. And I may have introduced, possibly, I don't know if it's been spoken about before, friction-free consenting with respect to people who want to undertake wetland enhancement. And I know that we've got a pilot, obviously, that we're working through at the moment, and it's in consenting, acknowledging that while we wait for national direction change, we need to be getting on with ensuring that folks can continue to do good things. So we kicked off yesterday following a discussion on Monday with our executive, actually starting to develop enhanced guidance material, as indicated there, to ensure that farmers who wish to enhance wetlands on their land to achieve environmental outcomes alongside other outcomes have the right material that supports them through that process in a way that means not spending money on consenting and preparing for consents, they're spending money on doing work, which I know that councillors are very supportive of based on discussions we've had around this table. Additionally, we have kicked off a piece of work looking at the deemed permitted activity rule as well, to see if there are opportunities where we can safely, and I use that in quite a broad way, provide guidance to farmers where under which circumstances it is safe for them to undertake that. Now that will probably be very narrowly framed, because what we want to ensure is that we're getting the right wetland enhancement outcomes and not necessarily the wrong one. So sometimes a consenting process is good just to lift the lid to check it's being done properly, and it runs with the best science and the like, and Motoranga Māori as well. So that's what we're looking at now. So we've learned quite a lot of lessons from that pilot around where those fish hooks are. We also want to tag it into existing work that Environment Southland has done. So, to make sure that those information burdens, I'm using that with quote marks, that we can make sure we're getting that information that's necessary for the preparation for those consents is as easy to access and free for farmers as well. So those are the things that we've kicked off work on this week. We want to work with the sector as well through our land sustainability team to ensure that it's material that's useful to farmers, not, regulatory speak, which obviously I love because of my role, but I'm aware that most people do not love that. And the other thing that we will be looking at, which I haven't kicked off yet, probably because it scares me with respect to achieving my cost recovery targets, but I will do it, is looking at the potential waiver of fees for those activities as well. But like a toothpaste tube, you squeeze it at one end, it's going to pop out somewhere else. So I just need to make sure that that is made good somewhere within the system too. So I'm prudent with our ratepayers' money.
Thank you, Hayley. We've got quite a long list of people who want to ask questions, but I'm conscious that we've got lots of things we've still got to come back to.
Rows, but it could be useful to take the questions.
So,
now.
councillors who indicated earlier for Marcus, with your permission, can we park those and have any questions for Hayley, or is that going to just make things really complicated?
What about Phil? Mine's for Phil.
yes, also Phil, but we,
Yeah, I mean, through you, Chair.
Can we come back to you?
Early days, we're scoping at the moment, so if councillors have questions that relate to scope or how will this work, it might be better for me to come back to with a more fleshed out scope for that work, because equally also it would be good to test it with our governors as well, who hold a lot of knowledge about such things.
And through you, Chair, we had looked at this for a workshop session.
Thanks. I think actually I've had 2 seconds to think about it, so I think we'll continue with the staff reporting and then go back to the questions from councillors. Thank you. So Rachel, who's next?
Yes, so with regard to that bottom line, not bottom line, sorry, the middle line, encouraging contaminant losses, or the reduction of contaminant losses and addressing the baseline issue. Basically, this has been an ongoing discussion and something that you had signalled you would like us to address through a plan change. At the sessions on Friday, so both by the Deputy Secretary and by Ministers Court and Bishop, there was discussion about managing cumulative effects. And basically what all parties said was with the reform proposals that managing cumulative effects at a property scale through regulation wasn't viable. Their advice was we need to take a catchment approach with non-regulatory and other tools in the toolkit. And I might get Phil just to talk through what that means in terms of potential options going forward and what we're looking at in that space.
Thanks, Rachel. So this is really a topic around limit setting and how you get into limit setting, because the concept of establishing a baseline is the first step of limit setting. It's effectively the drawing of the line in the sand against which future improvements are to be decided against. Now, we've had a number of discussions about this over the years, and there's been some enthusiasm to articulate in a planning sense, or at least in a narrative sense, a policy position on the part of council saying this is our approach in terms of establishing where a baseline is to sit relative to existing use of resources. Absent the blueprint that was released last week, we would, from a staff perspective, have been thinking about capturing that baseline intent through a plan change, but the blueprint has really set out, I think, a direction of travel that will require regional councils to go in quite a different direction in terms of how they deal with over allocation. There's quite a detailed part in the blueprint report that steps through how limits are to be set, but perhaps the most important piece, and that's in another bit of the report, is how over allocation is to be dealt with. And what the blueprint is saying is that regional councils in this context who are dealing with over allocation must adopt a policy to deal with over allocation in a way that's not first in, first served, which is the current framework for allocating resources, and that councils will need to establish a framework for dealing with that over allocation. And the blueprint steps through some examples of what that might look like. Some of the options that are set out are things like putting an economic cost or a fee on economic or on the use of natural and physical resources, and that fee might be used as a mechanism to drive down by, for example, purchasing and retiring land within a catchment. There are suggestions that there needs to be or may be a trading option so that those utilising resources might trade, and there may be a trading platform to deal with over allocation. There may be a dealing with over allocation through how renewal of permits is to occur. But what the blueprint is saying is that there will be national direction that sets out some options for how over allocation will be dealt with, and then councils must then choose which option they need to follow for dealing with over allocation. Now, in Southland, we know that resources are over-allocated. There's significant degradation across the region, particularly in relation to water quality. And so, assuming this blueprint comes to fruition in new legislation, the council's then going to have to engage on what the mechanism is to deal with that over-allocation. It would be, I think, challenging for the council to determine at this point in time what its approach should be by trying to answer a baselining question when that may not even be an option in 1, 2 or 3 years' time. And so in my mind, I think there would be danger in actually going out to a community and saying this is our policy if in 1, 2 or 3 years' time you need to go out and say, sorry, that wasn't one of the options in the toolbox that we had available and we're going to have to go down another track. And so where the staff thinking is at the moment is that we need to be very careful in this space in terms of what's said publicly, and my advice to the council will be that heading off down the plan change pathway at this particular point in time is not a particularly sensible way forward. Noting that, of course, this government has to sign off any plan changes on these types of subjects, and I can't imagine they would approve you going to do a plan change given what's been set out in the blueprint. So happy to take any questions on that when we've
we've got through all the other questions.
session. Yes.
Thank you. Rachel, did you want anything else?
Just very quickly, the other priority that we just wanted to highlight was farm plans, and we did speak a little bit about this last week. So obviously we're continuing on with our work with certifiers, stakeholders and landowners, but as I signalled earlier, we are expecting communications around farm plans very shortly, so that will need to be factored in. Is there anything, Marcus, you wanted to add to that?
The councillors are dying to ask the questions, so if you're done with your presentation, we'll move to the extensive list. Listen carefully. So we have Councillor Guyton, Councillor Cook, Chairman Horrell, Councillor Rodway, Councillor McDonald, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Morrison. I'll remind you when it's your turn, but just letting you know that you haven't been ignored. And Councillor McPhail. Anybody else? Anybody else?
Reserve the right to.
Oh, I don't know. Okay, let's go. Councillor Guyton, please.
Thank you, and to Phil particularly, I suppose, I don't know. I was sent an article which I've passed through to councillors. I don't know if anybody's read it or binned it, but on regulatory takings and the threat that that might present to councils. Phil, can you tell us a little bit about that?
I can share what I understand the term to mean in the context within which I understand it has been used in the blueprint to date. So the example given of a regulatory taking is in a heritage context whereby a building may have a heritage listing, and that is somehow seen to be depriving a property owner of the right to do with their building as they see fit. And the suggestion is that in relation to regulatory takings such as that, the council might need to compensate the owner of said building for being deprived of the opportunity to presumably knock down building or adjust building in a way that one would lose the heritage fabric. Now that's conceptually, I understand what it means. Whether I agree with it or not's not the question for us. But where my mind is more curious is about what does that mean in a regional council context when it comes to allocating resources. Now the blueprint, I think, recognised that somebody might ask the question, what does it mean in terms of resource use within limits? And the blueprint's been quite careful to suggest that use of resources within a limits is not considered to be a regulatory taking. So imposing a burden on a party to manage within limits is not what they're getting at in terms of a regulatory taking. So that's what I've taken out of what's been published so far. It's a new and interesting phrase, and I'll be interested to see just how that develops as the drafting starts to come through.
Okay, thank you. It came with warnings in this article. Because it's a new concept and it's buried not only in this but also in the regulatory bill
Yes. My read on it is it's tied to the property rights narrative.
Yes.
But the concept's not fully formed at this point.
Right. So you don't feel that it's a looming threat particularly?
It'll be a thing to keep a close eye on to make sure regional councils don't become liable for the way in which they are allocating resources.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cook, followed by Chairman Horrell.
Yeah, I was sort of, I'm not sure, my question just irrelevant. I'll just share Stuart's questions about referring back to past legislation and new legislation, and being advised that there's volumes of case law and definitions which have risen out of the current legislation. What happens to all of those, like the term for effect, for instance?
Good question. The sad thing with legislative change is you lose what we as lawyers describe as the jurisprudence. So all the case law that's developed over the last 40 years. In some situations it might be helpful, but let's stay with effect. Effect is defined in a particular way in the Resource Management Act. I expect it will be defined differently in the new legislation. So what will happen is there will be another 40 years of arguing about it to set up what the new jurisprudence looks like. So that case law will develop over time. And again, it'll depend what the new legislation says.
Thank you, Chairman Horrell, and then Councillor Rodway.
Yes, we had a whole list, but actually Marcus and Philip covered quite a few of them. But just on that last issue with going back to Stuart's question, they repealed the last government's reform. So we've actually gone back to the old RMA as I understand it. What we're sort of hearing is, quite a hunk of it's okay. And I'm sort of pretty hopeful that the jurisprudence that's been built up, if they keep those bits intact, hopefully that case law still has a place for be able to help us out on that one. But also the 2027, they're certainly talking about a far quicker transition than the 10 years that we were going to have before. RPSs are gone, so the work we've been doing on the RPS is obviously stopping, but strengthening the spatial planning, talking about regional planning. The Minister did say, well, you could put them all together, but that seems to be inefficient when they want a whole of regional plans that are consistent, which actually makes sense. But you would think rather than having 3 territorials in Southland copied together, that it'd be far better to have that oversight. And there was a bit of discussion about developers wanting to do something around Winton, and the Minister said, well, if the insurance won't cover it, they shouldn't be building there. And so it was, there's a lot of water to go under the bridge on all the stuff. The being able to charge is something that, if you look at the Australian situation, do we go down a charging water pathway, which then becomes a competitive bidding system that there'll be some lessons learned, but hopefully through the submissions and community process we actually iron out. But I'll leave it there. But am I correct in if they pick up part of the old RMA that your jurisprudence still will remain?
If the words stay the same, so they could pick up chunks of the RMA and just insert it into the new legislation, and then as long as things like definitions stay the same, then yes, it can be useful. But a phrase that you'll hear very often is what's a more than minor effect. There's lots of law around that, but if you change the definition of effect, just because you're using the same phrase, more than minor effect, means that some of that law won't be particularly useful, or it'll give an opportunity for rehashing it. So it depends how they do
it. Thank you, Councillor Rodway, and then Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, a couple of sets of questions. One about the spatial plan and the mechanisms for developing it, and the other about monitoring or a fee for permitted activities. So the first question is, will the spatial plan be developed the same way that other plans will be developed, in that you have submissions? There's going to be an independent hearing panel that will not be councillors, I'd imagine, will be independent people. And then when the independent panel recommends back to the councils what should be in the plan, what provisions are there for the councils to push back on that and say, no, we don't like that, we think it should be something else?
I can answer that as best as I understand what's in the blueprint. So in terms of the overarching plan, effectively the one plan across a region, there will be contributions made to that from each of the TAs, and then the regional council will contribute the parts that are referred to as the regional council parts, and that is what is used or described elsewhere in the blueprint as the natural environment plan, which is actually the plan that'll be dealing with limit setting and the natural environment type function. So that'll be put together, and then that will be heard by an independent hearing panel, and that'll comprise of members. I think there's a power of nomination on the part of each of the councils. So that's the opportunity to influence the composition of the hearing panel. Now, what happens next is that the hearing panel makes recommendations back to the various councils, and in relation to the part that is the natural environment plan, the regional council chapters, this council would have an opportunity to accept recommendations, and if it accepts recommendations, there are very limited appeal rights, questions of law only, or the council could reject those recommendations and make its own decision. If it does that, then those decisions could be challenged to the Environment Court, and it can be a merits-based appeal as well as a question of law type of appeal. So it influences appeal rights, but you do have an opportunity when it comes back.
Okay, the other question, sorry to take so long, but the other question is about permitted activities and how they can be monitored and where the funds from that would come from. We talked about some kind of levy being imposed. So we were talking about farming, for example, that's a use of a resource and an effect on a resource, so that would be permitted activity still, but there might be a levy on individual farmers so that funds could be available to monitor those effects. Is that the way you see it happening?
Yes, potentially, and then you add in the layer of if you've got over allocation, for example, within a catchment, and the mechanisms for dealing with over allocation include a levy on the resource which is over allocated. In terms of where that money goes, it may go to either central government or local government, noting that the EPA is going to have greater enforcement powers, so the actual compliance monitoring function will sit with the EPA under this proposal. I'm a little unclear about where the permitted activity monitoring might sit. I understand for resource consents that it might sit with the EPA, but that permitted activity space is, I'm just a little bit uncertain about that.
Okay, watch the space. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McDonald. Thank you for your patience, and Aoife.
Yep, no, very good. I find this very fascinating, Phil. So you in essence, you're telling us there will be some design pathways for us to follow in regarding to over allocation fixes. So that I've got that quite clear, and the absence of maybe what we would call a reference period or a start date, that could be taken off the table. And interesting, so nutrient trading to address over allocation over a period of time, that seems as though that's on the table, is it not?
Yes.
Wow. So my concern, well, I don't have concerns. I understand how it works, but I'd like to say too, I immediately think of the cost of running these programs. So I would like to know more about them. So a nutrient trading program, I assume the participants of that would fund some sort of program, and whether or not this council would be asked to administer it or would go to raw professionals or outsourced. There's all these, it probably sits along the farm planning, the scope of the farm planning. Just these are just my initial thoughts. But it's quite consequential to some of the things you're raising with us today. Yeah. Any comments, please?
Yeah, there's a note in the report that envisages the need for a mechanism to deal with trading, and the reference is given to some trading of water permits in Canterbury. We are over allocated resources. There was a trading platform set up. It was independently set up. But the report acknowledges that there will be a cost of setting up those types of frameworks and mechanisms, and that costs payable by resource users might be the source of funds to fund that. It doesn't land on whether the mechanism should sit outside or within a regulatory body, but the flag is there. When you've got over allocation, there needs to be some new ways of thinking about how to deal with that, and effectively monetising resources or putting a price on their uses seem to be one of the options.
Okay, just a secondary to that, if I could, Madam Chair. We are talking about strictly about over allocation issues as opposed to trading of water rights and the fears that might lead to corporate control of water. You know, so any comment around that, Phil?
I haven't really turned my mind to what the consequences of some of these options might be. I'd say they could be profound, but we don't yet know what the options on the table will be. So I think if you think about the chart that Marcus had up in terms of the timeframes for development of the legislation, it's going to be important that those types of questions are being asked when some of the information starts to come through. And it's the question of, what does this mean for us and our role as regulators? What do these options look like? What might some of the consequences be? Because you'll have an opportunity to influence through the select committee process, bearing in mind you get a very short window of time. So.
Okay, I think something to be aware of is resource banking. It happens globally, and that sort of capture. But I just if I could, Madam Chair, just talking about private property rights as a guiding principle. I'm really interested as time goes on to see how we define that, because for my thinking, it is a two-way portal. It can be used to protect other people's rights of their property. And I'll just give an example. So of spread of wilding pines from one neighbour and infecting another neighbour's property, surely the reverse of that would give me rights to my private property and the use of my private property. So I'm interested how that discussion will end up by forming and what it will look like. So it's just a general comment.
Yeah, throughout the report, you see the reference to the private property rights, but you also see, perhaps encouragingly, reference to externalities or external effects or effects that going beyond a property. So sticking with your wildwood pines, for example, yes, you may have property right to grow some pine trees on your property, but you won't have a right to have effects that go beyond your boundary. So the externalities or the effects of that will be something that will need to be managed. Yep. But again, where that line is drawn and how the words are framed up to describe this, I consider quite broad and loose narrative around a private property right will be particularly important.
Thank you very much. This is a great session here.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Gibson, then Councillor Morrison, please.
I'd just like to make a comment. I've been here for 800 frustrating days. And today, things have changed. Hayley's told us that we're going to get on with our wetlands. It's the first positive thing. What do you want to say?
Thank you. Councillor Gibson, just finish your statement.
I want to hear what he's going to say.
No.
I'm going to say anything.
Councillor.
Because I've been gnashing my gums for that period, and to hear you today, Hayley, was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Did you have questions for the team, or was that you?
No, I just wanted to make that
thank
comment.
you. Councillor Morrison.
Yeah, thank you. And two questions. You mentioned, Phil, that this could be 1, 2 or 3 years' time, and in the absence of any plan change in that interim period, that suggests to me that it could potentially be 3 years or more before we actually make any change in what's happening to our waterways in terms of putting limits in place or managing over allocation. The blueprint comes from an expert advice group report. This government does have a a pattern of choosing at times to ignore expert advice? Is it likely that this blueprint, I mean, what chances is it that this blueprint actually does define the outcome, or we could vary or deviate from that blueprint? I guess that's my first question.
My understanding, and Rachel may know a little more than me here, but my understanding is that Cabinet has approved the direction of travel under the blueprint, and this is effectively the blueprint that will be followed. So, but for, I think, the majority recommendation on what to do with Te Tiriti obligations and principles, where the Cabinet paper said they'll follow the recommendation from the minority, the rest of the report was supported. Rachel, have you got?
Just to add through you, Chair, for those of you that are interested, there was a paper that was released at the same time as the Expert Advisory Group from the Ministry for the Environment, which sets out, I guess, a comparison of the blueprints, suggestions, and what the Cabinet paper said in relation to those. The Cabinet paper itself has also been proactively released and is a very interesting read actually as well. That just came out later last week. So that may be something that you'll want to have a look at as well. We can make sure you've got links to all of those documents.
My second question was around the relationship of over-allocation and the concept of national environmental standards. Because this council has previously in principle agreed that our target should be the bottom end of the Hawara envelope. If national environmental standards are defined, does that suggest that the over-allocation discussion that we are holding regionally might be against a national bottom line as opposed to bottom of the Hawara envelope?
Potentially. There are some fish hooks in here from what I've read so far around the limit setting and how the national standard will work and what's left on the table for regional councils to develop. As I understand from reading the blueprint, the national environmental standards will be set at a level to protect human health, but that regional council will then have to deal with the standard necessary to protect ecological values. Now, my understanding is that the ecological threshold is actually much more stringent than is the human health stringent, for example, in relation to nitrate nitrogen. And so it looks to me that the gnarliest question of where you set the line has been maybe pushed back to regional councils to answer. But they'll need to answer that question with reference to attributes that are set out in the national environment standards. So that's how I understand it to work at the moment. They are saying that the EPA will act as an intermediary informed by science when it comes to setting those standards. But I do foresee some challenge in terms of leaving the gnarliest of questions on what's the ecological threshold to councils.
Thank you. Councillor McFarlane, then me.
Thank you. I'm just sitting here thinking about everything and just working out nothing's simple, is it? It's not going to get any simpler. In theory, that we look at these things that they're going to try and do. If it's going to take 3 years, it's going to be 6. The way things usually are, then nothing's going to be simple. This is so complicated. What they're challenging, how they're even thinking about trading and things like that. I just don't know why they're looking at that. They're protecting certain parts of the economy and things. So what we're saying that we're locked in with the system we have at the moment, fully grandparented structure, that won't be able to get sort of challenged. I'm always looking at the ones that maybe would be deemed as subsidising some other high-end output systems. You just look at this, the scenarios that are maybe coming ahead. You wonder how, when you look at the profitabilities of farms at the moment, it's just one's up here and one's down here, and meanwhile they're the ones that are probably have a bit more influence on river quality and that, and they're just saying, well, good on you, I've said this once before, see you in 3 years, we can carry on doing what we're doing. So there's no real I'm trying to think about an answer to this, but it's more of just hopefully you say yes, that we are locked in this structure for as long as it's going to be. It could be 3 years, could be 5 years before anything actually gets sorted. Baseline, to get baselines is probably quite important. We're not going to be able to do that.
That would appear to be the case at the moment. I expect we're going to see a lot more information come through over the course of this year. Regional councils still have functions under the RMA that you're required to meet, and once the direction of travel is understood, it may well be that as long as your direction of travel is consistent with what the overarching direction of travel is, then you can continue to do some things. My perhaps word of warning at the moment is, absent knowing exactly what that direction of travel is, we need to be very careful not to make a misstep at this point in terms of saying this is our view, but actually that's not even a view available to you. Perhaps the other observation I'd share is that legislation doesn't fix environmental problems. We put lots of words on a page, but what you know about the state of your environment, Southland, that's not going to change simply because the overarching legislation changes. And that's something that I think does need to be borne in mind in terms of what can happen within the interim. So a need for caution, but also a recognition that we are environmentally where we are in terms of the state of the region.
Thanks, councillors. Just two things from me. Forgive me if my anxiety is misplaced, but I'm a little uncomfortable with spatial planning work falling under the Planning Act. And from an environmental perspective, that makes me a little nervous, but maybe I misunderstand. Help me out with that if you could.
My read is they're struggling with the Natural Environment Act at the moment, because that's quite tricky, and that's the bit dealing with limit setting, use of resources over allocation, etc., and how that works relative to the Planning Act. It does need to fit. You can't divide the environment and say natural environment out here, spatial planning, whatever that means, over here, the urban bit, for want of a better phrase. Things need to work together. But where I see it coming together is that the Natural Environment Act planning provisions that the regional councils put forward come into that overall plan. So it will be connected. I worry about the connection. I see that the connection will be fought and argued about, because in a sense you've got a really enabling mindset sitting around the first piece of legislation, but a more protective bent around the second piece. We'll see where it takes us.
Highly productive land, for example. The other thing I wanted to say was to thank councillors for their discipline around holding their questions till the staff had made their presentations, because as Chairman Horrell indicated, some of his questions were answered on the way through. So I appreciate your patience and tolerance of my choice to do things that way, because and also to thank you for your insightful questions, because we've had a lot of really good information come from that. The other thing I would say is that thank staff, because Rachel and I have worked through the agenda for today several times, because the sands have been shifting, and so the fact that we actually got this conversation enabled today on short notice was not due to me, but to Rachel and the teams. So thanks very much for that. If there are no further questions, I'd like to perhaps have that recommendation moved, and we can move to the next thing. Thank you, Councillor Cox. Seconded, please. Thank you, Councillor Roy. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Philip, Marcus, Hayley, everybody.
And just to note, that won't be the last discussion, obviously, on this topic.
Oh, really? So that takes us to 9.4, which I guess is Marcus, you staying for this bit? Yeah. And Charlotte? Yeah.
What is this one? It's about just the changes and things like that.
You're good at that. I'll sit in the cheap seats.
They're pretty onto this bit, to be fair, the team. So,
thanks, Mr. Chair. So effectively, this latest version of the government policy legislative monitor, changes coming in through government. Effectively, you've seen this before. We've made updates in red, so anything that shifted or changed since the last version we saw it, so happy to get straight to questions.
I have one. Is there something that's finished and is no longer on the list?
Yeah, we're certainly trying to keep it compact as we can and keep shuffling things that are stagnant off. We're trying to just hone in on the stuff that's still moving.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Rollway?
Freshwater farm plans on page 8 under 3 land and water, it says that expected cabinet decisions on system design to improve etc. farm plans will be taken before the end of March, which is gone. There's freshwater farm plans regulations to be in place by mid-2025. So is that still going to happen? Are we still going to have, in the midst of all of this other stuff, we're still going to be pushing forward with farm plans?
Through you, Chair, perhaps if I can add, I have had some contact with senior ministry officials in the last 24 hours, and I believe communications are very imminent in this space. So my guess is that there has been some cabinet decisions of sorts taken. We'll hear about that soon.
Any other questions, team?
I'll move the recommendation.
Seconder, please. Yourself. Thank you, Chairman Laurel. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. So 9.5, excellent timing, Anka. Climate change and community resilience portfolio update.
Kia ora koutou. This, I think, be quite a brief item today. It's really just the appendix attached to the report, which is the interagency report from the most recent Regional Climate Change Working Group workshop. I guess the key focus over the last couple of months has really been the communications and engagement steps that we've been undertaking to support the development of a draft regional framework for action. That's still work in progress. Some of the key questions that we've been using for that in terms of what changes in climate have you noticed in our area? Are there anything different that you're doing because of our changing climate, and what actions are needed to support our region's response to our changing climate? They've been really quite useful questions to frame up that engagement, and we've got quite a bit of feedback coming through. So the intention is that it's going to be pulled together as a draft report for the Regional Climate Change Working Group workshop next week, and once that report is finalised, it will be brought to this council table as well. And the other big thing as part of communications and engagement is that we've got our climate collaboration on tomorrow, and I think we should have a pretty good attendance for that. So yeah, really looking forward to that too, because we've got an exciting range of speakers that are going to be there, and hoping to have some really good productive workshop time as part of that as well. So,
questions, or Councillor Morrison, did you want to add anything from your perspective or not?
Perhaps just to emphasise that the next 3 months will be quite important for the Regional Climate Change Working Group as we seek to finalise the framework for action document that we're currently working on ahead of the end of the triennium, and bringing that to each council in turn to consider. Yeah, so that's going to be a big focus, and there's a lot of we're bringing all that communication, engagement, insights to that work. We're going to need to bring it to that work quite quickly and in an agile fashion to then make use of that as we finalise the framework for action. So, but the collaboration across the councils has remained positive to date. And fingers crossed that we maintain that good collaboration, because it is probably a fragile at least.
I've got Mr. Bull and then Chairman Horrell and Councillor Cook.
Is there any opportunity to formalise this climate change working group? And as has been said in I think the question mark about the government radium coming at us, and as we see with national government, we could end up having a group of people say, get rid of all that, we'll just go and do things our way. So I guess, is there opportunity or ability to bring some formality to this working group and this COPA, this project. I would note that if there is an ability to do that, that might happen. I don't know how you might go about doing that.
So perhaps a couple of comments in response, if I might. It's something that our working group has considered. What is the appropriate thing? What is the appropriate status or mode of working for the future? For example, a joint committee could be one option. Interesting to note that up in the Hawke's Bay recently, Napier City Council's withdrawn from their regional joint committee recently. Some of our own members have commented, maybe we would not have achieved what we've achieved to date had we been constrained by the more formal expectations of working as a joint committee. It's a good question, and we have flagged it as a task to be attended to within the framework for action. So it's something that will be attended to early in the next training, bring a recommendation to council as to what would be the likely or best solution. Would observe that it also potentially connects to the joint regional planning expectation that may be emerging under the RMA reform process, because that possibly represents a natural home for regional climate planning and climate action within that regional spatial plan space. So that probably is another thing to keep a watching eye on how that emerges and looking for the opportunity to connect climate change planning to that. So there is different ways of working, and we're considering what they are, but the jury is probably still out at this point on what the recommendation would be for Southland.
Yeah, I would just
Appreciate
your
your concerns. Yep.
of losing that continuity
And the impetus.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Chairman Horrell.
Do you have reasonable numbers registered for tomorrow? It's always been my concern is that some of the territorials are sort of saying, well, you guys deal with it, that's your issue. It's that total buy-in and wider that I guess is my concern.
So I don't have a final number of the RSVP list, but it was last time I looked, it was sitting around the 100 mark. So we'd be quite happy if we do get that number of people attending tomorrow.
And just to be clear, it's stakeholder, right? So it's a much broader.
Yeah, we've taken a stakeholder approach to this, Hui, and tried to make sure that we were very broad in terms of those invitations. So I mean, if there are a last minute RSVP still coming through, we can still manage that. We want to have as many people in the room as possible.
Councillor Cook.
Well, Councillor Morrison's already mentioned it, but Napier pulled out because what they perceived as a lack of progress and lack of action. I'm not sure what they were going to replace that with. I don't see that happening here, and just as a warning, though, it could happen if we're not careful.
Any other questions? Just from me, thanks to the team for pulling that collaboration Hui together in a relatively short space of time, actually. Anybody who's tried to plan an event knows how difficult that can be. So looking forward to that. And I'm delighted that there'll be some young people there as well. Taking a different perspective again. Somebody like to move that recommendation, please? Thank you, Councillor Morrison. Seconded, please. Councillor Rodway. All those in favour, please say aye. Next. Carried. Good luck.
Thank you.
You don't need luck, it'll be fine. It'll be marvellous. 9.6 is the group update. Liz, welcome.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'll kick us off. So yeah, a bit of an update from the government reform side of things. At a national level, Environment Southland presented to 2 select committees a couple of weeks ago, which was well received, and there's been a follow-up action too on the Section 70 amendments directed to the Ministry around that. And we'll also compete in the Tomato ROI wastewater standards which are proposed. They're due out for consultation at the moment, so looking to put a submission on that, but it'll probably fall into the retrospective approval process again, just due to the timing of the next round of committee dates. At the Southland scale, we recently attended Donald Park master plan hearings and also worked through those aspects, but the core district plan has been a bit of a focus for me lately, working through the process of getting the Mataura River flood model incorporated into the Gore District Plan process. So it's ticking away in the background, and there's been a minute received from the panel around some additional joint conferencing, and the last wrap-up hearing is on Monday next week on the 7th to work through the final stages of the Gore District Plan work. So I hand over to Liz now.
So my part of this report is really around the coastal plan review process that we're continuing to work through. Staff are well aware of potential changes in that national direction state, but are carrying on with what we can do in the meantime. This report covers some of the outcomes of the engagement exercises that we had. We attended about 7 events over the summer, and we got a phenomenal amount of engagement. We felt like it was really positive. I think if you look at the website hits, we're looking at over 800 people who went onto it, and to get the actual responses and the submission and the questionnaire from that, I think our hit rate is relatively good. I guess that reflects that people all have an area of the coastal environment that they enjoyed going to visit, and they all share relatively common values in that space. No major surprises in terms of the outcomes, but we're still working through the feedback that we've got. Some of the feedback was quite substantial, and we got feedback from like 3 and 4 year olds, so probably not as substantial, but definitely as meaningful. So it was a great exercise and will be useful for when we go forward with our drafting and making sure that we are reflecting what the community wants and values in our approaches. Thanks, Liz. Questions? Councillor Roberts.
Well, thank you. 2 questions. One, it relates to the Gore District Council and the evidence presented at the hearings about the risk of flooding in Gore, and we've seen this recently and how devastating that could be. What kind of promotion, what kind of work with the Gore District Council are we envisaging, if any, to make people aware of this and to think of some way forward in the future to reduce the risk of all of those businesses and houses being flooded in one big flood? Seems to be pretty serious to me, and we should be doing something about it, including thinking about a long-term plan of moving those places out of harm's way.
Through you, Madam Chair, great question. So effectively, the district plan, I guess, is only one component. So the panel and Gore District Council have made it quite clear that they want to try and work through the comms and engagement and turning that flood modelling into common knowledge with Environment Southland. So they want to make sure that it is not just a them or an us process. They want to be combined in that space just to work through exactly what it means in its current space. Moving forward, I think the spatial planning process and the new blueprint and previous spatial planning exercises is that vital tool to help open up that conversation around what is the community going to look like in 30, 40, 50, 100 years, and what are those steps that we need to start getting ourselves into that space, and what are those associated funding levers that we can pull with LTPs and those sorts of processes too to ensure that there is that we have healthy, thriving communities in a healthy, thriving environment. The spatial planning is a great tool to help mark that trajectory and try and get ourselves into that right space of, and it's not purely going to be a Gore and Mataura thing moving forward. Effectively, that's the modelling we've got at the moment, but we've got a number of other townships that also have similar constraints and similar problems, whether it's for Brian or coastal, that we're going to need to work through over a long period of time moving forward. So that answers the question.
Thank you. The other question, Madam Chair, was about the survey of values of the coastal and marine area, and it seems that there are relatively few. Whether this represents the whole population or not, I suppose, is another question. Relatively few people see it as an area where there are opportunities for economic development, and yet we hear about that all the time from Great South and from the government, and how we're going to have all these wind farms out there and all of these marine farms and all that sort of thing. But the general, is it true that the general public don't really see this area as a place where there are opportunities for development, economic development?
One of the points, we don't necessarily, these responses aren't necessarily reflective of the whole. I think it is still a small proportion, so it's not saying that that's a shared view across the whole. It's shared view of the people that we manage to engage with. But it is, we're using it as a reflection, so we won't be using it as scientific guidance that everyone in Southland shares these views. It's that we are going in the people that we talk to are heading in that direction. So we will be conversations with other people and other stakeholders will also inform the approaches that we get through. So what you've got here are the in this report are the ones that identified it as the most highly valued. So there will be other results as we work through it where it might be, they might think it's of value but not necessarily significant value. So they might sit on a 3 as opposed to a 5, and that's not reflected in this report.
Okay. Delve down to
yeah, we need to go through that detail. It's quite a few pieces of paper for us to collate and to run those questions through the data.
Yeah, and if I can, Liz, it's fair to say that those options, they were priorities, but they had to rank their priorities. So it's not like, even though it was lower down the list, it was still on the list, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, the question was meant to rate their value as opposed to rank it. But some people did rank. So that was a design fault, I guess, in the question. But yes, so there will be some who will sit on a 2 or a 3, even a 4.
Councillor McFarlane?
Yeah, just in regards to the Gore District plan, in a minute, putting up to us for a discussion around how we inform the public, and that information is in the public arena now, isn't it? Is that right? We haven't put it on the front page of the news by any means, but it is public information, that modelling, isn't it?
It's direct through Chair. It's on our council website now. It's available for the general public to consume.
And certainly, especially with the meeting with Minister Bishop the other day, you know, he said, if it's flooding, why are they allowed to build there? You know, it was quite blunt, and so there's certainly a feeling that there's even from well up in the government, they're saying, you know, from insurance and that, why are you letting people build in potential floodways? So it's certainly in the forefront of the government, and certainly our views of this is reasonably, it could be quite straightforward. It's how we deal with that in due course. But I just want to make sure that people know that it is in the public arena and can see some of this modelling. It's quite important to get their heads around it.
Through you, Madam Chair, the Southland Regional Policy Statement, which is, you know, it's made operative in 2017. That's the basis for our Environment Southland submission on the Gore District Plan. In the Regional Policy Statement, it says avoid growth and development where there is a significant natural hazard risk. So whether it's riverine or coastal risk, the position is that where there is significant risks, you don't build, you avoid that. And then where there's a lower risk, then potentially you can mitigate by building 4 levels up and managing those effects. So that's effectively the position on Environment Southland's submission on the Gore District Plan was around if there is a significant risk from flood, which is what the modelling indicates. The position is moving forward that is not a good place to continue building and growing alternatives. And in the longer term, with climate projections, if the floods are going to continue getting worse, then mitigation options such as building up stock banks isn't necessarily going to be a long-term viable option in the future. So it's effectively trying to set up that conversation around where to next and how do we start planning that process forward for those communities.
Any other questions?
No. Just on that, if the regional policy statements are going to be gone, dissolved. How do we deal with that? Is an enhanced regional spatial plan going to take its place, or just where is that guidance going to come from?
Certainly. So through Madam Chair, there's effectively two pieces. One will be national directions. There is national direction coming in the natural hazard space particularly, saying this is what will be appropriate, this is what is not appropriate. But effectively that joint plan process, the rules or objectives, policies and rules in the joint regional plan will have that those aspects around where development is appropriate and inappropriate. So effectively it'll be a merging of the RPS objectives and policies into all of the objectives and policies of water, coast, land, city, industrial, all of those aspects. So you incorporate those regional policy direction around how that should work.
Good luck with that. Anybody else? Somebody like to move the recommendation?
Happy to move, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chairman Laurel. Seconded, Councillor Cock. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thanks, team. Item 9.7, excuse me, is the update on council requests and actions.
Chair, just a short update on the climate change portal in particular. So our information systems manager has had a look at the discussion that you had and gone through some options and is recommending that we go forward with a team site. So assuming that you're happy with that proposal, we would run a little training session. I'm aware many of you will be quite familiar with Teams, but potentially useful to just have a check-in on all the functionality that a team site has in terms of sharing documents and a feature, that you talked about, enabling comments and dialogue to occur alongside. So we will move on to that training session if you're happy with that proposal.
Mostly nodding. There are some risks associated with this, of course, so we would maybe need some parameters around.
Yes, I think it's probably important to be aware that everything in the Teams channel, in the same manner as in an email channel, can be legitimate. So just being aware of that and adhering to the process and procedures.
Yeah, I wonder if we could have just a wee, maybe not right this minute, but at that training session, just a discussion around, the purpose and who would monitor / administer some of that, just so that we don't get caught up in A, too much admin, or B, no admin. So maybe just a discussion around some of that, because I'm interested in how councillors might see that working, so that we're all safe and able to learn some interesting stuff, because there's lots of great things to be shared. Yeah, so if you're all right with that, councillors, we'll progress along those lines. Teams thing and a discussion around how we actually, just some how-to steps and how not to steps potentially. All right, anything else from the councillors' requests that we need to cover off?
Just for you, Chair, my proofreading obviously failed me on page 84 of the agenda, and the recommendation contains a reference to a letter that was part of a previous agenda. So if you can just cross that out.
Yep, sure. All right, anybody like to move the recommendation? Thanks. Nope. Thanks, Councillor Rodway. Seconded. Councillor Morrison, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. There is no extraordinary or urgent business as far as I'm aware, and there's no public excluded business either. So that brings us to the end of this morning's strategy and policy meeting. Kia whakaarea te tapu, kia turuki whakataha ai, kia turuki whakataha ai. Kia wātea ai te ara, haumie hui tai. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy lunch.